Members of the board, you'll remember last year, as part of our strategic plan and our concern and interest in making sure that we're taking care of our premier workforce, that's reflecting Goal 3, we had indicated that we wanted to do, and it was time because it's been many years since we've done a comprehensive compensation study. We know that we've got to do better by our employees, but we need a roadmap that tells us very clearly where we are and how we can proceed ahead in the coming years. That this kind of study takes a lot of time, almost a year. It's almost a year-long piece of work. And so we were very intentional as we discussed the scope of work that we wanted as much information to be available to the board as possible, as early as possible. So you'll remember that we said we're going to phase the results. So today you're going to be seeing the first part of the compensation study, and we prioritized our teacher scale for obvious reasons. So I just want to be very clear that if other employees throughout the system say, well, wait, what about us? This is just the beginning. We have much more work to do in the coming months. This compensation study will have, they're looking at all other employee groups, and so we'll have a lot more work to do. But with almost 15,000 of our employees being our teachers, and we know that this year particularly, I think we've experienced quite a bit of concern, certainly in the national trend and shortage of teachers. We've felt right here in our own school system. I don't know that we've ever opened a school year with 200 vacancies. And so I think this board and this leadership team have appropriately prioritized this part of the study first. So just want to make that clear to the public and anyone else that might be listening. This is just the first part. I also will foreshadow that our solutions, we know that we're not where we need to be on all of our employee categories. And I think the solutions will be a multi-year kind of approach. So we'll talk more about this at the end of the presentation, but I want to make it clear that this is just the first part of many other major pieces of data that will come out as a result of the compensation study. So I'll turn it over to Susan, and I'll let you introduce Siegel Waters Consulting and get us started.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Garza. We have with us Heather Kazemi. She is the Vice President with Siegel Waters Consulting, and she'll be presenting us the results of the market study for our teachers. So the results from all the other positions will be coming in the coming months in January and February. And again, this is just the first phase, which is the market comparison. Obviously, I think the hard work is still ahead of us as to what work is still needed to improve our teacher salaries and what the compensation models may look like. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Heather, and she's going to go ahead and go through the presentation for you.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you for inviting me to your work session. How's that? Okay. Again, I'm Heather Kazemi. I'm with Siegel Waters Consulting. Just a very brief few sentences about the firm. The Siegel Group is a nationwide human resources consulting firm with 24 offices in North America. We specialize in providing analysis and advice to public sector organizations on total compensation. For the past 20 years, I've worked with local and state governmental entities, including public school systems, to evaluate the competitiveness and efficacy of pay and benefit programs with the goal of ensuring our clients can effectively recruit, retain, and reward the talent that is needed to serve their communities and achieve their missions. Today I'm going to share with you the preliminary results of the market assessment we recently conducted for teachers. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and the purpose of the market study, and then the methodology we used to conduct the analysis. And then I'll share with you the findings for teachers. Now again, these are high-level key findings for teachers. A full report is currently being finalized that covers all employee groups. And then last, I'll talk a bit about the next steps in the process. So as you know, the board has established a strategic goal to have a premier workforce. and to recruit and retain high-quality employees who are valued, respected, and rewarded for their efforts. This market study contributes to that goal by quantifying our market position on a total compensation basis. In other words, the study seeks to measure the competitiveness of the current salaries and benefits compared to the pay and benefits offered by other employers in the area. In the next phase of the study, once we understand our market position and how others value and reward their employees, we'll then develop a new compensation model that is designed to recruit and retain the qualified and skilled teachers and staff needed to support the current and future needs of the school community. Now let me share some information about the current situation. Difficulty recruiting teachers. Despite recruiting about 2,000 new teachers this year, we still had about 200 unfilled teacher positions at the beginning of the school year. As Susan reported to you in November, we still have vacancies, especially in several critical field areas such as special education, English, math, and sciences. There's also concern about our ability to recruit new teachers in the coming years, especially as more and more of our current teachers become eligible for retirement and as the nationwide teacher shortage becomes more acute. Nationwide, the number of people entering teacher preparation programs dropped by 30% from 2010 to 2014. And a bit about recent turnover among your teacher population. Teacher turnover, and when I say turnover, I mean non-retirements. I mean people leaving for any other reason other than to retire. Teacher turnover has increased in recent years and is now about 7%. This is up from 5% in prior years. So we're seeing a trend upward in turnover. This means that we lose over 1,000 teachers every year, and we would need to recruit over 1,400 new teachers every year just to maintain current staffing levels. Among the new teachers who came to FCPS in the 2010-11 school year, 41% left within 5 years. We've also lost many experienced teachers in the past few years. School principals have expressed frustration about losing excellent, highly trained educators to other school districts in the area that offer higher salaries, such as Arlington and Alexandria. Last year, 650 of the teachers who left our school district had at least 5 years of service. That's about a third. Now, again, these are not retirements. Exit surveys show pay as a driver of this turnover. Last year, the exit survey found that over half of those who responded said that the pay rates influenced their decision to leave Fairfax County Public Schools. And about 30%, almost a third, said that those who left said that that salaries influenced their decision a great deal. Of course, the pay freezes in the past few years have also affected employee morale and commitment. For 3 of the past 6 years, our teachers have not received the step increases shown on the salary scale. These step increases are designed to reward and recognize a teacher's experience and expertise. In addition, salary scale adjustments were also frozen for 2 of the past 6 years, which, as we will see in a minute, has affected the market competitiveness of the teacher pay program. So all of these trends affect our ability to maintain the workforce that we need to meet the mission and the vision of the school district. These trends also set the stage for this compensation study and the need to modernize the pay programs to meet future needs. Let me tell you a little bit about the methodology. As Dr. Garza mentioned, the study will cover all employee groups. While I'm presenting to you today on teachers, the full study looks at teachers and related professionals, instructional assistants, school administrators, as well as other support staff, business operations, healthcare services, food, nutrition, transportation, facilities, all employee groups. The study covers 3 market segments within the Washington, D.C. metro area. This is who we're comparing ourselves to. In any study like this, we have to start with defining what is the market. If we want to ask how competitive are we, we need to define what that market is. For this study, we selected, of course, other school districts, and we chose the larger school districts in the area, including 4 school systems in Virginia, 2 in Maryland, and DC Public Schools. Now, for those positions that are not specific to school environments, such as business operations and so on, we also included 2 other market segments. One is the local governmental employers, that is other county governments in the area, as well as the federal government. And we also are looking at the private sector employers, again in the metro area, both for-profit and nonprofit private sector. So as I mentioned earlier, the study is designed to evaluate total compensation, including both salaries and the cost of employee benefits. A large portion of total compensation is base pay, which is represented by the minimum and maximum rates on the pay scale. We also looked at pay supplements and stipends, such as additional financial recognition related to expertise and demonstrated skills, work environment, and so on. And to calculate that total compensation, we also included the costs associated with health-related benefits. That's medical, prescription drug, dental, vision, all those health-related benefits, as well as the current contribution rate to retirement programs, including primary and any supplemental retirement savings programs. Now, I know you're all familiar with your teacher salary scale, but I wanted to show it to you again anyway. It's a traditional lane and step model that has 6 pay lanes based on a teacher's educational attainment, starting with a BA lane, which is for teachers with a bachelor's degree. BA plus 15 means a teacher has earned 15 additional credits towards a master's degree, and so on. And again, as you know, these educators make up almost 2/3 of our workforce right now, are paid on this pay scale. A little bit about the distribution of current teachers. You can see in the box on the left that 19% of teachers have a bachelor's degree, and you see the distribution there. What's notable is 72% of our teachers have at least a master's degree, a master's plus 30, or a doctorate. You'll see that that salary scale has 23 pay steps designed to recognize teaching experience and years of service. And right now, 9,380 teachers, or 64%, almost 2/3 of all teachers, are in steps 5 through 20 on that pay scale. I want you to remember that number because it'll become important in a minute. 9,380 teachers, or 64%, of current teachers are on steps 5 through 20. And I'm going to call those the middle years of a career. So after someone's been teaching 5 years, they'd be at step 5 through 20. So when we compare the salary scale to the teacher pay scales of the 7 other school districts in our study, we found that the current salaries are close to the survey average at the beginning years, that is years 1 through 4, for new teachers. In those middle years, though, the years 5 through 20, the salaries, teacher salaries, are below market during those years. And then they become more competitive again after about 20 years. For example, a new teacher on step 1 of the master's pay lane earns about $156 less than the survey average, and about $317 less than the starting pay, that's step 1 for a teacher in Arlington Public Schools, so pretty close to the market. By the 15th year of teaching, however, the market gap widens to about $8,500 compared to our survey average, and about $20,000 less than Arlington Public Schools. After 30 years, a Fairfax County teacher earns a total of $142,000 less than the market average, and $293,000 less than a teacher at Arlington Public Schools. When we include the benefit costs in the analysis, our market position improves somewhat, but is still behind market during those middle years, years 5 through 20. So the next few slides show this information in tables and charts. This table shows just the master's pay lane. Since 72% of the teachers have a master's, I thought I'd focus on the master's lane for this analysis. And you can see here the numbers I just talked about. In year 1, a new teacher with a master's degree earns just $156 below the survey average. It's 99.7% of market, rounded up 100% of market. At year 10 and year 15, however, a Fairfax teacher's salary is about 10% below the survey average. Again, it's the average of all 7 school districts in the study. And that's about $6,800 below at year 10 and $8,500 below the average at year 15. At year 25, we're somewhat closer to the survey average, but still about $2,000 below. The next chart shows the cumulative effect of these differences. The green line at the top of the chart is the survey average, and the dotted red line is FCPS. In this analysis, we started with, we're looking at career earnings over a 30-year career, and we assumed in our hypothetical scenario here, a teacher would start with a bachelor's degree and earn their master's degree over time. So while about 2/3 of your teachers start with a master's degree, we did want to start with assuming a 30-year career starting right out of college. So this also assumes that the standard step increases and lane advancements would occur based on the pay policies as they're written. So you can see that the salary at Fairfax County is just slightly below the survey average in those beginning years, but the gap widens fairly quickly until it starts to narrow again after about 20 years. And the cumulative effect of this market gap over that 30-year career is $142,000. But during those middle years, the years 5 through 20, our teacher is earning about $110,000 less than the average teacher in our study. So again, this graph shows a comparison to the average of all 7 school systems. And I wanted to show you a slide of the similar kind of analysis just compared to Arlington Public Schools. As you can see, the year-to-year pay gap between Arlington and Fairfax grows significantly over time. In some years, a teacher in Arlington earns $15,000 to $20,000 more than a teacher in Fairfax County. On a cumulative basis, an Arlington teacher earns about $293,000 more than a Fairfax County teacher, with most of that difference occurring in the years 5 through 20. So that's just the pay only. We were just looking at the base salary and how the salary scale is put together. The next 2 slides show the same kind of analysis, but on a total compensation basis. So here we're including the costs of health-related benefits and the contribution to the retirement programs. We see the market gap narrows somewhat. And this occurs because while our health benefits are similar to the survey average, our cost for health benefits is about the same as what we see in our survey, the current retirement plan costs are somewhat higher. We contribute a combined 19.66% of teachers' pay to the primary and supplemental retirement plans. That's broken out into 14.06% contribution to the VRS, and then another 5.6% to the supplemental teacher retirement plan. Sure. It's a total of 19.66% and 14.06% to VRS, and then 5.6% to the supplemental retirement plan. And that's of pay. When I say percent of pay. While the market average is about 15%. The contribution rates among the 7 school districts that we saw vary from about 10% to about 16%. But nevertheless, the total compensation market gap for a teacher at Fairfax is still significant, $72,000 during those key years, years 5 through 20, and about $52,000 over that 30-year career. Now, a similar chart, again, to Arlington Public Schools. Since I showed you the salary-only comparison, this is the total compensation comparison. So again, we see the market gap has narrowed a bit because of those differences in benefit costs. But nevertheless, the total compensation gap between Fairfax and Arlington is still $163,000 during the years 5 through 20, and $141,000 over the 30-year career. And again, this analysis includes the base salary, the average cost of health benefits, assuming the employee is enrolled in a health plan, and the employer contributions to the 2 retirement programs. And a few words now about, I told you we also looked at pay supplements. We collected information on additional financial incentives and rewards offered to teachers. We found that all the school districts we surveyed provide additional pay to teachers in leadership roles, such as department chairs, lead teachers, mentors, and so on. These pay supplements are typically designed to recognize additional work time involved in these assignments. And here in Fairfax, we recognize and reward those things as well. Similarly, all of the surveyed school districts, including Fairfax, reward teachers for national board certification. Typically, these are based on the state guidelines and state funding. We also asked about financial incentives related to some critical needs areas, such as special education, hard-to-fill teaching disciplines, and high-need schools. We found that 2 of the 7 school districts in the area do provide incentives for special education teachers. One gives an additional pay step, and the other pays a stipend for teachers in this critical area. But in the hard-to-fill teaching disciplines and high-need schools, areas where have been identified statewide as critical needs areas, we didn't find any schools in our survey who provide additional financial incentives to recruit or retain teachers in those areas. So I just want to recap a little bit of what we found on the salaries and total compensation comparisons. We found that teacher salaries are close to the market average in the beginning years, below market during those middle years of years 5 through 20 of a teacher's career, and somewhat more market competitive again in the last years, 20 through 30. And after including benefit costs, we found that our market position improved somewhat, but is still below market during those middle years. Last slide. I want to talk a bit about our next steps. Of course, we have to complete the market study analysis for all the other employee groups. And then thinking about a new compensation philosophy and a new approach. We're going to be conducting some employee surveys and focus groups to be talking with teachers and support staff about some different ideas and different approaches. And then recommending different approaches designed to recruit and retain and reward high-quality employees, including new salary scale approaches, potential incentives and rewards for those critical fields and hard-to-fill positions, as well as the benefit offerings. And naturally, a part of that step will be estimating the cost of implementing any of those changes. That's it.
I want to clarify just to make sure that, and maybe it doesn't need to be clarified, but just for anyone that might be listening, your comparison was of our scales, our current scales, to other school system, to those comparison group scales. It's not necessarily looking at actual or average teacher salaries in our current system.
That's correct.
And I think that's an important distinction. It was made at a recent supervisors meeting, because the only way to fairly compare it's looking at your scales. If you look at average or actual compensation, we may have more experienced teachers. So it skews potentially the findings. So I just wanted to make that point clear and to make sure that that was
It's absolutely
correct
correct.
understanding. It's the scales.
Okay, I have Dan,
What?
followed by Ilyang.
Huh?
Well, my first question is
Okay,
the,
I think I'm creating more confusion. Okay, it's actually comparing the scale. So what we advertise for brand new teachers, or if you're year 5 teacher, it's actually looking at how you pay. So it's really what our teachers and teachers out there look at when they're wanting to consider coming to Fairfax, right? And then once you're in the system, it's at least what our teachers and our employees perceive as what my lane is, what's going to happen to me over time. Okay, that's what this study looks at, and clearly it's sobering, isn't it, where we are? But if you look at average, we could have a lot more experienced teachers, and that kind of skews it.
Okay, Dan.
thank you. I appreciate this is in many ways long overdue. We've recognized for some time and that we are not where we need to be. And I think this frankly raises far more questions than it answers, although it probably confirms, if nothing else, our sense of where we were. And now I don't know if it's worse than I thought, but it's definitely not any better than I thought. And regardless, it's not what we can afford to do if we're going to have a first class and world-class school system. So I'm all in on that. Technical question, then I have a broader question. The technical question is the comparisons that you made, retirement and health benefits, were there some kind of actuarial valuation that was made of our benefit, or just the pure cost? It costs us $100 to have this particular benefit, and versus they spent, $200 on their benefit.
On now? Okay. We did look at just the cost, I should say, not just, but we looked at cost. The employer's contribution to health benefits on average, and the contribution rate to the retirement program. So we did not actuarially adjust based on value of the
So
plan.
the value of the health benefit an employee is getting could be greater because they may have less out-of-pocket costs than somebody else who, let's say Arlington has a health plan that they pay. They're less generous towards contribution, which means the employee is going to have to take more out of pocket to have that same level of health benefit. So we don't really know what that is what I hear you saying.
That's correct. We didn't look at plan design. We also didn't look at experience, that is, use of the plan. In some other organizations, there may be just the demographics of the workforce can affect the cost of the plan, as well as the plan design and lots of other aspects. So we didn't adjust for that. We just looked at what does it cost for you to have a teacher in the classroom.
We can supplement the findings on that because we've actually done the analysis that compares one health plan to the other in terms of every indicator, right? Out of pocket,
Right.
So we do have that. I will tell you, and I go back to your original comment or one of your earlier comments. We did find that our health plans, it just simplifying something very complex, we were actually pretty comparable from one system to the other. Is that correct, Susan and Heather?
That's correct. And on the retirement benefits, we are trying to get another study on the benefit levels of the both the VRS and the supplemental plan. So that will be a complement to this study, and we're hoping to have both of these studies done around the same time frame.
And from my perspective, and I'm sure the board's future perspective, just to have that's also a value that's not reflected in the cost, and I'm hoping that our value is greater than the cost relative to other school systems around here. That so we have some value added there that others might not have with the RFC as well as a VRS. Probably is the same across the board, but the RFC ought to have some impact. The other part of the question I had was a more broad question, which is. I know you looked at numbers. Did you look at the particular approach that obviously Arlington, because those are highlighted in here, but it could be any of them, that they've used either like a strategic approach that they've used about how they've framed or how they've created or contoured, if you will, their compensation programs. Obviously, Arlington did what I would think would be a more appropriate way to do it, which is you're going to try to attract people in their most, what we would consider the most productive years of teaching. And maybe as they, get to their oldest years and they're maybe less valuable in the sense of they're not likely to go anywhere, so we don't have the same kind of incentive to keep them here, lock them in, and try to have them finish their career here with us.
Right, and I think we can see from the Arlington chart that
Great
it's,
example. I mean, I'm saying those folks were brilliant. I mean, this is exactly approximately what I would think you would want to design.
right, that the pay increases are steep during, when the learning curve is steep, and then it does top out, if you will, at earlier years. And that's what we can surmise about what their approach is based on the design of the plan. And I've seen some other school districts in the area do something similar.
So there was no specific collection of strategic direction or guidance that have been given or developed around how they want to bring that piece together with what they've actually done.
We could look at, say, published compensation philosophy documents, but I have to tell you, when you do a survey like this, those that answer the survey may not be willing to share their behind closed doors discussions about their compensation strategy and approach, so that it would be difficult to tease that out. But we can see the direction they're headed based on what's public.
My purpose in raising that is, again, this board's going to have some, I think, hopefully tough decisions to make about trade-offs, and having some sense of how you craft and contour a policy that reflects that, I think would be helpful for them along the way as they kind of wrestle with these competing decisions about whether to put the money here or put the money there. And I, for one, have had a particular feeling that we need to give more options for our middle year teachers, actually particularly our earlier year teachers, but maybe the first 10-year teachers, so that how much they contribute into retirement versus what we currently expect them to do. I realize that has other impacts, but we also know that that's maybe more attractive, and that could be part of our challenge right here with that competitiveness.
I think that's going to be the heavy lifting part of this work, trying to define that philosophy, because I think what you want to look at is our data. Where are we having the difficulties recruiting, retaining, and using our information and our data points, we're going to have to develop that compensation philosophy and ultimately get to that compensation models. And I think that is going to be the critical piece in the months ahead, because this is really just getting data from the surrounding jurisdictions and kind of comparing where we are, where's our market position. But our data points could be different than some of the other jurisdictions. So we really need to look at what are our challenges and what are we trying to accomplish. And that's, I think, is going to be the hard part of this work.
And I'm starting to learn a little bit more about some of the county corridors, if you will, they've had of compensation, and particularly with the uniform employees, which is kind of in some ways the most they're most easily defined. They have very specific, if you will, philosophy, expectations about what they'll do and how they'll do it. So I can see an important value for this board to do something similar to that. I think not only because it'll help maybe ensure county resources in the future, but also it's a way of providing long-term understanding and commitment to employees about what they can expect. Thanks.
Thank you. Il-Young, then Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Along the similar line of a suggestion and questioning from Mr. Stork, that I think we should have this data, so we don't have to go to other districts to see their data. If other districts could also share data with us, that would be even better. But we can start with our own data. I want to see. You mentioned that from year number 5 to 20 is mid-year. That's where 64%, you said, of our teachers fall under. Whether our teachers, the 64%, more or less evenly distributed from year number 5 through 20, while you see I want to see a based upon number of years of service, what our retention rate is like. So if the board wants to implement major policy shift or policy change, whether we have a data to support that the teachers with a longer years of service with us will stay with us. There is a tendency, maybe more chance of staying with us, no matter what the policy might be. I wouldn't say no matter what, but we may be able to keep more teachers with a shorter years of service. That's what I want to see. And I think at the beginning of this presentation, I believe that was stated that this is just very first presentation of your study to the board. When should we expect to see the next presentation or next phase of a discussion by this board?
We're hoping all the study results will be shared with you by February. We're going through
All to be done by February.
the market study
Okay.
adjustments. And in the meantime, we are going to start to have some conversations about the philosophy, because we are going to be doing an employee survey in early spring about their philosophy and what they value in a compensation package. So this is going to be kind of like happening and picking up speed come January. It's just that we're just starting to get the markets study results, and we wanted to share the teacher information with you first. And then we have all the comparisons for the remaining positions, which are many, many, many more out of our unified scales, to include school-based administrators and all the other positions that Heather had mentioned earlier.
So the development of a new compensation in a philosophy, obviously, if it is a philosophy that's going to govern future discussion or decision by this board, so is it your intent as you develop the new policy to include the board members' input in that?
Absolutely.
Okay, with that in mind, because the next thing I saw was a recommendation of compensation models and approaches. I'm looking at the, I think page number 18 of your slide. That I understand why this might not have been included, because there's no school district in the area using that approach. But for the I wrote it down, high needs schools, there's no school district giving a additional stipends or additional compensation for the high needs schools. But I, as a one board member, are very much interested in looking at the possibilities for the high needs schools. So even though there are no school districts around, whether it's your intent to have a further discussion on that, or if there is no direction from this board today, that you're not going to have the discussion at all.
Mr. Moon, actually, the scope of study was very specific in that we do expect for the company to provide us recommendation on what works. Even if there aren't surrounding school systems that do it, that's specifically identified in our strategic plan as something we want to look at, and we want to have some options. So there's a good bit of work over the next 6 to 9 months on this. We hope to have, I think, the full completed study done by maybe May or June, but we're still going to have a lot of work to do to get every aspect of the plan and also recommendations.
Thank you, Dr. I'm glad to hear that, hearing that from the superintendent.
We need some
because
ideas.
I brought that up only because that was not a part of that slide number 18 on the recommendations. Number 18, I don't see high, it really talks about critical fields and hard to fill positions.
They used hard to fill positions, I guess, on that particular slide. We were talking about hard to staff schools.
Okay.
That's how it's referenced.
As long as you interpret
in
that,
our
it's fine with
strategic
me.
plan.
Okay, thank you.
Sandy, then Megan.
Thank you. I appreciate the initial report. This gives us great information as to what some of our key challenges are. So thank you for bringing this forward. I did have a couple of specific questions. When you talk about, I think it was more than 70% of our teachers have master's degrees or more. Do we have a sense of how that compares with our surrounding jurisdictions? Is that fairly typical, or are we atypical in having that many that are at master's degrees and higher?
It's
This, goes back to what Dr. Garza was mentioning about we the average is going to be different than the scale.
The 72% of teachers here with a master's or higher is a fairly high number. Nationwide, it's 55%
Oh,
teachers have a master's degree or more.
okay.
I can tell you in Maryland, teachers are required to get a master's degree
Okay.
within a certain number of years. So you will find it higher in Maryland,
Okay.
but it certainly here is higher than the national average.
Okay. When we looked at page 4, one thing that surprised me, because we've been talking about mid-career salaries, and I've had a concern for some time about mid-career salaries. If you look at increased turnover, I guess this surprises me a bit, that third bullet, a third have at least 5 years of service. That suggests that 2/3 of those leaving us, though, are leaving us in the first 5 years with us, which, if you're thinking in terms of pay, that it's more competitive pay in the early years. Do you have any sense of why so many of those that we're losing in those earliest years? I mean, is my math right on this? If over a third or 5 years or more, then almost 2/3 are leaving us at year 1 through 4, correct? So do we have a sense yet of what that reason is, since our pay is more competitive at that level?
Sure. We do have the exit survey data. And we know that we asked, shouldn't say we, I was not a part of it,
Okay.
but I know the survey asked why people left. And if you hold on one moment.
You almost have to look back at that Goal 3 report. You ever remember that we gave not too long ago? It had a little bit more detailed information about where we were seeing that folks were leaving, and we looked at cohort groups. And we can pull that for you again from the Goal 3 report. But we're finding that, there's some of it's just a natural turnover, just kind of indicative of our area. But we're also seeing, with regard to younger people, they were starting to see that they're less they don't stay with a particular company forever. So we're going to have to look differently at how we compensate, particularly when we look at benefits long term. The millennials, they're going to have 11 different jobs potentially, if not more, over a period of time. So, I think they're more inclined to move around.
Well, I guess that's something to look at, because my recollection, I don't have it in front of me, was that in the first couple of years that our retention level was actually very high, I thought. So, and I realize we're talking about the reverse of that. We're not talking about how many we're retaining. We're talking about how many of those that leave are in their earliest years. So it's two different equations. But it would suggest that perhaps it's not just compensation, that we have to be thinking of other things as well. If 2/3 of those,
and there were other reasons that were reported about why people leave.
Yeah.
But we can pull that again, and y'all can look at that.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, actually the top reason for the exit survey results was personal reasons. After the personal reasons, salary had a great influence on their decision to leave, but a lot of it was personal.
So a lot of those leaving in the earliest years, maybe moving for a spouse going, things like that we don't have a lot of control over.
Correct, because if you look at the 5-year cohort that we had for teacher
Okay.
retention,
All right.
that's where all that information
Okay.
is.
And going back to the pensions, I didn't quite get all of that. If you could tell me again, the market was what compared with what our folks? It was 15% market average?
The survey average was 15%.
Yeah.
That ranged from 10 to 16 among
Okay.
the 7 different school districts we looked at.
And ours for VRS and ours for ERFC? It's 5.6% for ERFC, is that right?
Yes,
And
VRS is 14.06. Every district in Virginia is going to have the same rate for VRS.
So the
Correct.
differential for us would be that 5.6.
5.6 is our
Okay.
supplemental, and some
Okay.
districts surrounding us also has a supplemental plan, but theirs is a defined contribution plan, like a 401k, and
Gotcha.
and they'll do some match to that supplemental plan, which is different from our defined benefit supplemental.
Right. And lastly, I would just say I appreciate Mr. Moon raising the issue of the high needs schools and the hard to fill positions. I want to say that I do agree with Mr. Moon. I am very interested in looking at that as well.
Megan, then Janie.
Okay, bear with me. I've got a couple of questions. And I first want to begin, just for those who are watching, since my colleagues already know this, my father was a career teacher over 20 years, public high school, and did have to leave mid-career, being concerned about how to raise 3 daughters and put them through college. And he returned to the teaching profession in later years. So I have great sensitivity to all of this, and I know my colleagues and I are dedicated to this with Dr. Garza and her leadership team to addressing this. So I say that because my line of questioning, I don't want it to be taken as anything less than sensitive to the importance of this topic. But the first one is, because I'm very much driven by data, is the turnover rates that we're talking about on page 4. Are those numbers just FCPS? And if so, then I think it's very important as a next step that this board be provided with the data of the turnover rates in the other schools districts that were studied in this analysis. And I also would want the national average, and whether or not it's relevant to understanding other industries. But I think it's important that we at least, you can't look at turnover rates in a vacuum or in a bubble without context. So I think that's important. Second question I have is that in the study analysis, you mentioned the various districts that were included. I think you said 6. Alexandria and Arlington, as we all know, are extremely small. Alexandria is a single high school district. Arlington, I believe, is at 4. So how was that formula, that calculation done, in the sense that did they factor in at 1/6 of this is what the market's paying and this is what we're doing? Or was the equation and the calibration done by the fact that they are so much smaller than Loudoun, Prince William, Montgomery, Prince George's? Because if you're looking at both salary scale and then total compensation, if you've got 2 smaller districts that, in some ways have more nimble ability to maybe pay much higher salaries, if we're looking at how we compete in a marketplace, the total number of jobs that Arlington and Alexandria offer that compete for teachers wanting to go teach for them versus for us versus Prince William, Loudoun, or Montgomery, I mean, that plays a role. So I would like to understand, when you took that data, both for salary and for total compensation, was it just, here's the data from those 6, threw it together and that was the average? Or did you?
The market average, and how we calculated it, is a straight average. Just looking at, essentially looking at our one hypothetical teacher throughout that 30-year career, and what salary would they make if they went to any other school district, regardless of the size of that school district. If there's one position, what does it cost to have that one teacher in that one position at another school district?
So I think that's very important, and I wanted to make sure I understood it. So for my colleagues, if you looked at the charts, when we got compared just against Arlington, it's extremely dramatic. And so if Arlington and Alexandria each made up one of those 6 pieces, then a third of the schools that are in that comparison are very tiny in terms of what they make up the market share. And I think that's something we have to be thinking about in terms of just understanding the impact that 2 small districts, who quite frankly have the right approach, which is to make these competitive industries, but we do need to be thinking about that.
But I think it's also important to keep in mind that, yes, they are smaller, and they can't hire away all of your teachers, but they can take your best teachers.
Well, yeah, I do want to keep in mind that we're 6 times larger than Arlington, and we're basically 24 times larger than Alexandria. So uh, I just think it's important that when we are engaging in this kind of conversation, I got to tell you, one of my biggest worries is how we help our employees not feel so demoralized. And so that brings me to my primary question. When you look at page 10, it says the master's pay lane market comparison. So what I see is that percent of the market in the years where we start to lag a little bit, it's anywhere from 5% below market to 10% below market. That's again just in the pay lane. So it's important. It matters. Any one of those teachers are going to look at that and say, boy, especially between years 10 and 20, $6,000 or more a year makes a difference. Unfortunately, when we go to page 13, when we look at total compensation comparisons to FCPS and the market average, we don't have a similar chart like number 10. And I think that would be very helpful to see year 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, the actual dollar amounts there. Because I think that is really how you get a very visual understanding. This line graph doesn't tell me in those cut points what dollars are on the table. 72,000 divided over 15 years means it's on average $4,800 a year lost. That $52,000 over 30 years, if you do it just year by year, it's $1,700 that they're losing. And I think that's important to have those numbers. And then my final point that I'd like to share with my colleagues and Dr. Garza is, and I think some people are trying to get at this earlier, it is the approach we're taking on. It takes a really long time for this school system to reward its teachers before you start to, and I don't know if anybody else did the math, but I did, from year 22 in your career to year 30. So in your final 8 years of your career in FCPS, you're doing better here than the market average when you take total compensation. So number one, I want our experienced teachers to see that. I want them to know, yes, we've got to fix 15 to 20, but please don't feel that your time here is that you're not respected. We are respecting our veteran teachers here. What we're going to have to figure out is what can we as a system do? Do you reward at 10 like Arlington was doing, or 12 in that range? So I really I'm going to be asking for a next step on this one. I would like that bar chart, like the one you had on the pay lane. We need that for total compensation. I want to be able to talk to employees and the public and talk about where we are in those cut times. And, the only other thing that I will say is it is imperative that when we are talking with our employees and we're talking about total compensation, it may be that we have the conversation with them of, what do you want more? Do you want more salary, or do you want to keep your benefits where they are? My husband is a general counsel and director of HR of an international company. And when I talked to him about this leading up to today's work session, he said, without question, obviously the younger employees are going to say salary matters. The further you get into your career, it's going to be the compensation. And he said sometimes the best industries are the ones who are going to give the employee the choice and say which is the one you want to buy into. But I just want to end my comments by saying I really hope if we can get that other chart, I would like to at least reassure our employees that it is not that this school system completely disregards teachers, but it is in the way that we've decided to set our pay scale and set our benefits. We don't necessarily look as good as Arlington, Alexandria, but in the grand scheme, we're close to making things better. It's not, I think we can get there, but we will have to make some really important decisions with Dr. Garza and our employee groups on where do you want that red line to go.
Janie, followed by Pat.
Thank you. This is an extremely important and helpful study, and I am very glad that you all have undertaken that. And the Arlington chart is just mind-boggling. And those of us who have schools who have directly lost their very best teachers to Arlington, it is very, very concerning. A couple of things. The average age of our employee group, we usually put that into the budget book. Do we know what our average age is? It would be interesting to know the average age of the masters. No, average.
So we typically publish in the budget documents the average salary, but that doesn't show the average age of our employees. It's just the average teacher salary in total.
We used to, but maybe we can't put that in anymore. Maybe we can't ask that. That would be called ageism. Okay, we used to do that. What is interesting in the past, 30 years, we've tried 3 times to figure out how to compensate, how to selectively compensate in a strategic way. Merit pay didn't work. We ran out of money. Teacher leadership, we ran out of money. Grants, we ran out of money. And I think what this does is it shows us you have to have good base pay during the neediest time in somebody's career in order to keep them, period. I would encourage us to continue to do more research on millennials in the workplace. There's a company called Life Course Associates that does major work in this area. And I think when we look at this, we see, yes, people who stick it out in this career for 20, 30 years, they're doing better. But I think we simply cannot assume that that is what is going to happen, because the data shows us that there is no career and no job in this particular generational age group that is going to stay in a job, a career, or be loyal to any one company. That's just not the trend that we're seeing anywhere. And there is tremendous competition for the brightest people in this age group, and particularly in IT and entrepreneurial. And these are exactly the same kind of people we want to keep in our schools. So I think that's a key piece to understand, because it is that age group that we are losing and we need to keep. One question as we look at total compensation, and I'm pleased to see that we are comparing ourselves to government, to nonprofit, profit, in other words, the whole market. I think it's also important that we take a look at the whole pension plan that the county offers, because I know there are a lot of questions, citizens asking us about, well, why do we bother with any of these other pieces? And they forget that the reason why the school system has it is because the county employees, it was invented for everyone uniformly, I think back in the 1970s. So people need to understand that piece. The other part as we take a look at this is the quality issue, because as we're out talking to the average citizen, trying to keep our system together, the most common questions is, well, I understand you have more applicants per position, and then the question is the quality. And I think we have to, and I think you said it very best, that, well, Arlington can't hire everybody. They are hiring our best, which we're seeing that. But I think that the studies, we need to pay attention to not just the importance of quality, but how do we define quality. National Board Certified is important. Looking at the master's scale plus 15 plus 30 is important. Years ago, we know that in Maryland, their BA scale does not, it ends, and which forces more of them to earn a master's. On the flip side, research and all the various studies, they argue whether or not it was important to get more schooling. And then the other question that is often raised, well, if you would just lower your standards, you could get more warm bodies. But so I think paying attention to the need to retain people at the height of their career and quality people. Because that's, our parents understand that our current schools. But again, as we are looking at fixing our budget situation, it's more than current parents in our schools.
Okay.
Yeah, just a minute, I make sure. I think I've asked my questions.
Thank you. Pat, then Ben.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is very helpful. I just had a conversation on Friday with an elementary principal who told me that really it's unprecedented, the challenge that they've had this year in filling spots. And for the whole season, In other words, all of the applications they got from the very beginning, it wasn't just that they ran out of time. It's for the whole summer and into the fall, there just weren't as many applicants. The applicants were not as high quality, and very fewer Virginia applicants, which I thought was interesting too. Many from out of state, from places where there are hiring freezes. So anyway, just this is real and it's happening. So I had some questions. I don't know if you can answer today, but do we know how many positions remain unfilled right now in the school system, or filled with substitutes? And I can take that answer later if that helps. We started with about 200, is that right? Okay, all right. Just wondering if I could get an update on that. And then also, can we compare that with surrounding jurisdictions? In other words, our percentage of unfilled positions this year compared to the percentage of unfilled positions in Arlington, or I don't know if we can do that or not. Oh, okay, all right, that might be helpful, because I think if
I think it may be more of a challenge too in the larger system. So we may want to check with them.
All right, if it's not too
We'll
hard to
ask.
get. Okay, all right. Also wondering, is it a lot of work to get more data about the trends in the applicant pool? I mean, that's an anecdotal information that I'm getting from principals, right? Can we take a look at the applicant pool and see how many from out of state, how many relatively have graduate degrees, how many have experience? I mean, can we get some data that shows the applicant pool is actually less attractive?
Sure. I think internally we will be able to get that information. I know our HR folks are working with the principals, and they just had their first meeting, I believe, last week, to kind of talk about how to define that highly qualified applicant. So they're trying to find out what key characteristics or attributes within the resume that principals are looking for. So we are working on trying to define what that means. But, just getting whether or not they're internal to Virginia or external states, I believe we could get you that information.
All right, thank you. Because I think it's one of the questions we get, and I just got it recently. Well, where's your data? You say that we're hitting a tipping point on, we're not getting enough applicants, we're not attractive enough. Well, the problem with the tipping point is you don't know you've hit it until you're past it, right?
And that's correct. And the principals will tell you we are getting applications, they're just not qualified applications. They're passing on those applications. The quality of the applicants are not there.
Right, so thank you. I will finish, Ms. Smith, just on that note, because the last thing we want to do is send the message to anybody that, number one, we don't have qualified people in the classroom. We do, right? It's not that the people who we've hired this year are not good teachers. They are. It's just that the choices we have are not as many as we used to have, and that's noticeable. And I think just getting a little bit to Ms. McLaughlin's point, I agree. The last thing we want to do is anything that demoralizes anybody in our conversation, and that's the challenge we always have when we talk about the budget. Is how much do we talk about how the budget situation is hurting us without making the problem worse in some way, right? But I think it's more demoralizing to not talk about this, because as a teacher, I know when I get that first paycheck in September, I know if it's the same as the paycheck I got in June, or if it's more. Teachers are acutely aware of whether or not they're making enough money. And so I think for us to not go to this trouble and do this work and have this public conversation about compensation would actually be worse. But I do understand the point, and I think we have to be careful about it.
On that note, because that is a very important note, I will tell you, last year is when we embarked upon this. Remember when we developed the whole scope? The employee associations were all involved in defining the scope. And I will tell you, I'm keenly aware of that, trying to strike that balance with championing for the needs of our system, those needs are very acute, and also recognizing what great employees we have right now, and not creating conditions where they don't feel valued. That tension is very real. But I will tell you, the employee groups last year were very appreciative of the fact that this board was interested in this subject matter and willing to invest money in a deep study of where we are, recognizing that we're in a different place, but at least we're a system that's acknowledging this, and we have a plan that sets a plan to address it. So I think this is it's all about how we provide the context, I think, for this conversation.
Thank you. Ben, then Elizabeth.
Thank you. I just want to echo my appreciation for this presentation. As a student, seeing great educators leaving our system in such large numbers is really alarming to me, and I'm really glad that we have this data. My first question really relates to page 14, particularly with a focus on Arlington. We see so many of our top teachers leaving for Arlington, but as a total compensation package, I'm noticing that about year 13 or 14, it seems that it's plateauing. And that's interesting to me because we have the same pattern about 10 years later. So does that mean that in their pay structure, their teachers are reaching longevity 10 years before ours are? And could we comment on why that might be?
That is correct. The salary scale at Arlington does top out a little sooner, as we were talking about over here. It appears that their compensation approach is to have steep increases in the early years and then tops out after about 10 or so years, as you say, and then there are longevity increments after that. So there is a plateau.
And in fact, if you can go to page 14 of page 8. This is how many steps we have. Most school systems around us don't have this many steps.
Is there a reason that we went to that model? I'm just trying to understand why we're on the 23-step model as
And another
opposed
thing
to a
that's
13-step.
interesting to note on this, not only do we have a lot more steps, that it's more incremental over time, we also have a lot more lanes than other school systems do. Most surrounding school systems have the bachelor's, master's, and maybe a PhD. At most, probably 3. Is that correct, Heather? Most school systems they don't have as many differentiations as we have.
Typically, you see 4.
Okay.
4 lanes.
My second question is, when we look at our salary scales, we talked about how this compares in the market, but my question is, when was the last time that any of the peer divisions that we surveyed in this study actually moved their pay scale up, to keep up with market factors like inflation and cost of living? So they shifted their bottom line, their first step up. And how does that compare to us? Are they doing it more frequently? Have they done it more recently? Is that a factor in why they're more competitive in the market?
I don't have those numbers with me today, but I can tell you it is very typical at budget time to look at the salary scale, knowing that is the largest expense of any school system, and to look at those factors that you mentioned, cost of living, inflation.
What I was going to say is when we give a market scale adjustment, it moves the entire scale. If we only give a step increase, that doesn't in any way adjust the scale. So when we've had limited financial resources, the choices that we've made have influenced the movement of our scale.
And then just my last question.
That's really
Yeah,
important.
Mm-hmm.
I want to emphasize that again because that will affect, many of you alluded to the decisions that are ahead of us. That's an important distinction, I think, for everyone to make. We've given a step or we've given a delayed step with nominal, if any, a market scale on top of that. So our scales stayed the same when other surrounding systems, they continued to invest in their scale and did more incremental percent market scale adjustments, is our terminology.
Right.
And that moved their scale up and they've surpassed us.
Well, the reason I ask that is because I'm, looking at this, I'm concerned about teachers' actual take-home pay in real dollars. And if that's not moving with inflation and cost of living increases, then our teachers are actually making less, than other teachers in surrounding divisions. So I kind of wanted to touch on that point. And then my last question, it happens far less often, but I'd be interested to know how, we have teachers occasionally leave for jobs in the private education world, at private schools, so and stuff like that. And I would ask how our pay structure, this step structure that we have now compares to the way that they pay their teachers. Are they on a similar step thing? And I know that's something we didn't cover in the study, but just as a general question, do they follow a step thing or do they do it a different way?
Most private schools pay less, and probably most of the time, this is purely anecdotal, that people that move to private schools oftentimes can retire from the current system, but continue to work if they go to a private school. So oftentimes that's what you'll see, because they can rarely compete with the public schools. that I've seen. I don't know if anybody else has any experience with that.
First year we've actually.
Or class size, yeah.
Elizabeth and Tammy.
So we've done a lot of talking and not as much asking. But one of the first things that I wrote down, because I didn't see a direct correlation, was I thought you said that 41% of those who left within 5 years.
What that number is the teachers who started in the 2010-11 school year. It is looking at tracking all of those same teachers over a course of 5 years. At the end of the 5th year, 41% of those who started in 2010 had left.
Okay, so my question is, what is that correlation, and do we have any way to know what is that correlation to some of these surrounding jurisdictions? What is that correlation to nationwide, but more pertinently to nationwide, large school districts? Is that sort of people who have this novel idea, hey, I love to be a teacher, and the practicality of what it means on a day-to-day basis doesn't quite match up with what they had in their head, or they go on to different careers? I mean, so that's a very significant correlation.
I can tell you our 5-year retention rate is about the same as national average. I think Susan has shared those numbers with you in the past. Why people leave is, there's so many reasons why teachers leave the profession, why they leave a particular school district, why they do all sorts of things.
Okay, so it's about on par with the national. Do you have those statistics for either surrounding jurisdictions or large school jurisdictions?
Not with me today. No.
Okay, so I don't know who's doing follow-ups. I'd like to know if that data exists, and not that we're asking you to go make new stuff, but because it sounds like a stunning statistic, but it sounds like we're also just about par too. Now, if those departures are higher than surrounding jurisdictions, and that there is an egress out of FCPS to other jurisdictions, then we want to know, because then we're investing up front in training and losing them to surrounding jurisdictions. So that's kind of key to know. 2 is, you said 98% fall between year 5 and year 20?
No, about 2/3. I can get the exact number, but it was not 98.
Where did I hear the 98%? So 2/3 are between year 5 and year 20. Is that also commensurate with kind of a national average or surrounding, that you have a little bit on the front end, then people get into the stride and stay 5 years 5 to 20, and then you have a few who stay at that maximum? Is that about?
Again, I don't have data from others.
So the real question, can we go back to the 20 to 30 where they margin out? Because that was a key observation. Right. So total compensation, because that does show that we continue to highly compensate, kind of at the end of the career. And so another question would be, what is the 20 to 30 year career retention of surrounding jurisdictions versus FCPS? Do we have a lot of teachers hanging into that 20 to that last 10 years where it is highly compensated versus other surrounding jurisdictions, such that you're trying to look at where you're driving the message to employees is, listen, you are here for a career. We're here to invest in you and we want you to invest in us. And oh, by the way, punching out at year 7 doesn't, no, guess what? You're not going to be highly compensated in year 7. But, as you're rounding out your career, that's where, I hate to say pay dirt, but that's where pay dirt is.
What becomes important, again, probably anecdotal toward the end of your career, is your retirement benefits. What's driving the red line above the green up there is our retirement benefit costs, not salaries. Yeah. So you're going to be able to see, without even pulling the data, that most of our teachers, it's very likely that we're retaining the teachers at those upper end of the scale.
Because they want to tap
Correct.
out. Well, okay. Well, that's okay. It's let's be, we don't need to talk around it. It becomes more important. And so I guess that's really my biggest concern, lies in the fact that our message as a school system is often around salary, and that there is, the Paul Harvey rest of the story here that has to go with, the communications part about how heavily we invest in a career teacher, not somebody who's going to be here and either, get the upfront training and then, decide that they're marketable elsewhere for more upfront money. But that, this is a place to have a career. And now it doesn't mean that we're not going to have to address some of those things, but it is a structure of a message. And it sort of goes in the face of what's happening in the private sector. People don't stay, so whether we want to adjust our message thoroughly and say, either we're going to stay on this scale concept and go for 30 years, and you are a teacher in FCPS and we value you throughout your career and provide you opportunities for professional development and, spreading your wings and doing new things. And by the way, I do support, more highly compensating, difficult to fill positions. Or we throw this to the wind and, do a do-over, with new employees and say, we're going to reimagine what it means to be a teacher and go to a, defined contribution type of, you come, you stay for 5 years, 7 years, whatever, we get the best out of you, you get the best out of us. It's sort of like a Booz Allen Hamilton. We'll munch you up, you'll munch us up, and then you'll move on. And, I think that just talks about where we are as a division in terms of philosophy. Are we going to reimagine what it means to be a professional teacher and just pay them upfront in salary and start to curb that back end, or not? But I think some of those comparative analysis data points, this is like I ask on anything else, are helpful for us to understand in context. Us comparing ourselves continuously to Arlington when, if you remember, Dr. Garza, from our lunch, our business leaders luncheon, our special education population is larger than the entire Arlington County student population, just our special education students. So, us holding up a yardstick to Arlington, how many 20 to 30, even as a raw number and as a percentage, how many people are sticking around in Arlington County for 30 years versus FCPS? And I think that would be a startling statistic. So.
Thank you. Tammy and then Ted.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Most of my questions have been asked at this point in time, so I don't think I have any, except I would like access to the questionnaire. Can we see that? Could we as a board see that, or have you shown that to us?
The survey document that was
Yes.
sent to the school districts?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, I would like I would like to see that. And just commenting, because as I said, my questions have been asked already. You can adjust the messaging and all that you want, but at the Board of Supervisors meeting, I spoke about the challenges in my district, or the hiring challenges in my district. And there are many, but the two more dramatic examples I gave about a language immersion program with no teacher through the end of October, and a middle school with no 7th grade math teacher through the entire semester. those are real data points. Those are real problems that we're having. I think that, well, like Dr. Garza said, it's a tricky path. We value our employees. We want to make them certain that they know that. We've talked a lot, so I don't want to repeat it all, but when you look at the people who are coming in, and you do have to look at the Gen Xers and you have to look at the millennials and what they want, and to make certain that if we can keep them here for beyond the 5-year period into those middle years for some reason, and to say that it's fine to look at Arlington, but if you have someone who's settled here and can go over in those early years to another school district, that's what you can't say. Don't compare yourself to them, because as you stated, they may be half our size, but if they're stealing our best. And if they're going over there for all those reasons that 30-year-old who's starting a family needs to go over there for, then that's a real concern, and that is the concern that we need to make adjustments for. I think that's one of the most important things we have to do.
Thank you. Ted and then Patty.
So our board can embrace the direction that's implied here, but until we get taxing authority, Mrs. Smith, we can't make that happen. So we're going to need to get a commitment from the Board of Supervisors. And to get that, we're going to need to have the support of, I'll call them the school huggers, the business community, and the taxators. And I can say the last one because Arthur Privis is a friend. The school huggers, we're getting plenty of email from them. So, of course, the supervisors don't listen to them. But let's talk about things that are needed to convince these other constituencies. First of all, for the business community, I hope that you all will consider strongly looking at outsourcing of food service, IT, non-instructional, and transportation, because the extent to which we pay retirement and benefits for these classes may be something, a place where we can reduce costs and convince some of these people that we're running a tight ship. As for the tax haters, they do have a point, and that is that, the taxpayers have largely not had a defined benefit plan for the past 25 to 30 years. And so it is difficult. It's difficult for us to be in a position where we're going to go to the mat, as we should, for employee compensation without considering whether a defined contribution plan would be better for the employees and better for us financially. So I hope this will lead to at least an honest conversation about where we need to go with that. My preference, or I shouldn't say a preference, but a straw man idea is that we extricate ourselves from the VRS. It would be nice to not be under the foot of the General Assembly and their whims, and evolve the ERFC into a defined contribution plan, which in my mind, every year when we hear the ERFC presentation, I feel like I'm getting one of the best presentations I ever get each year. I think it's extremely well managed. And I think if the ERFC were actually the organization that were managing the employees' investments in a defined contribution plan, I would have some assurance that their interests are being guarded. Finally, with the supervisors, again, with the goal of addressing the core problem here, we need a memorandum of understanding with those people about some key things. We need some swim lanes, and we need to get rid of the arbitrariness of budget decisions, and we need them to sign up with us about, and I've got a list, ending the structural deficit, targets for employee compensation. What are we going to do about unavoidable costs, our strategic objectives, policies like class size that have financial implications, and the carryover? If we could just get those people to sit down and sign an agreement about some principles, we could get somewhere. Without that, it's going to be really hard to make these things happen, and we need to hold their feet to the fire.
Patty?
Wow, I have to follow that. Thank you for the presentation. As Mr. Stork said, about an hour and a half ago, I think it does raise more questions than it answers, but it's certainly a good place to start. I'll try not to be repetitive. It sounds to me like we still have to answer the basic question of, does this pay scale approach still work for us? I mean, I've heard that, maybe we've got too many lanes. I don't know that it applies to everyone the way it should. I mean, to me, that's the basic question without getting lost in the minutia. Particularly given the fact that we have so many different types of positions and now younger folks coming in with different values, maybe that just doesn't work for us anymore. I don't know. But that's for another day, I suppose. Another issue that I would like to raise after listening to this discussion is whose comparative data is most useful and informative to us as we go forward. For example, you said that you looked at, in the initial part of your presentation, the government, the county and other government, and then the private sector. But then when you talk about your market averages, I think I heard you say that was just the school systems. Is that right?
For the teacher comparisons, yes. We just looked at other school systems that hire teachers. When we look at all of the other jobs that do have a broader market definition, so facilities, transportation, business operations, those we see comparable positions in local government as well as private sector. So that's when we're looking at that information.
Okay, and so that, if I could wish for more data, it would be having those employee groups broken down and see the comparabilities and actually see all the data that we've been talking about, turnover rates, comparison of total compensation by those various employee groups. And to Mr. Valkoff's point, then it might be even more obvious that we need to outsource some of those functions. To continue here quickly, because I know we're running out of time, there was a discussion about plan design and that wasn't examined, and already we've talked about defined benefits versus contributions, and also I'm a big advocate of the cafeteria plan, as I am a Booz Allen alumni, and it worked very well for us because I did get chewed up and spit out after a number of years. But it was a very good training ground, and I enjoyed it. But that was not a long-term situation for some people who would choose that path. Another question I have that hasn't been raised yet, and that is the retirement age, whether or not that is something that is different among organizations. Because as I understand it, I don't know what the number is age 55 or something. Anyway, we have some people who leave and then go somewhere else, and they effectively double dip. And I'm not putting any value judgment on that one way or the other. I'm just wondering, is that kind of a standard practice?
Some of that has to do with our local ERFC and some of the plan designs, but we're having that studied right now, and those findings we brought to the board this spring to look at that. Some of that depends on what plan you have, because there's been, just like VRS, VRS is now a hybrid for all new employees where it's split between defined contribution, defined benefit. But the board will have some of that to them. The study's undergoing, it's being completed right now, will be to the board in the spring. So we can look at, do you all want to make changes to ERFC?
But is age 55 kind of the general, or what is the age?
I believe currently the average retirement age for ERFC is 62.
Okay. Years of service, yeah, versus
your
age.
In the legacy plan, you are eligible at age 55, but obviously each individual's retirement plans are different. So the average age currently is around 62.
Okay. Also, when recommendations are being made, it might be helpful to indicate what some of the priorities are. In other words, you won't be able to do everything all at once. I'm assuming that for example, the high needs areas, the hard to fill positions, that might be something that we tee up sooner as opposed to later and try to address, right? And last but not least, I wanted to also mention the retirees, that hasn't come up, and I wondered at what point in the process would you be looking at the benefits afforded to the retirees, such as the health and dental, because they have raised that to us for years. So that's just a question about whether or not that their benefits would be looked at as well.
You all know that we've talked about starting in January, we're putting together a task force. We'll be looking at just our health program, our health insurance program, that it would include benefits we offer for retirees, because we're going to have to consider some pretty significant design changes in total. Now, anything we do for our retired employees, of course, will have a price tag associated with it. So we'll just have to, again, prioritize and make some decisions, at that point.
Thank you.
So I think this is an important time for us to have this discussion. It's been very frustrating that we haven't been able to do it sooner. And I think it is to our detriment that there's so many lanes and so many steps to get through, especially when you look at the cost of living and for people to be able to afford an apartment or live on their own. So I'm hoping, I won't be here, I'll be one of those people. And but that I hope that we'll be able to look at something that will create significant changes that will make a difference. And it is a surprising change when we've been able to start school years year after year fully staffed. And for somebody that's been on the board a while like I have, to hear where we are now, our problems are here and we're late in addressing them. So I wish everybody well with this, and it is definitely the right time to do it. Megan, you had to go back?
Ms. Smith, you will be a part of the solution.
Yes, Ms. Smith, I do have a go back. It's just very important for me to number one, clarify something. I'm not talking about trying to hide behind an uncomfortable conversation, or I want to, whitewash or rose-colored glass this thing. Not at all. I have been very clear in the 4 years I've been on this board that we absolutely as a system have to honor our words, which is if we are not being competitive, especially with our teacher employees, then we need to identify what the problem is and we need to fix it. And so I don't want anybody to think that I was saying, oh, this might demoralize our employees. What I was saying was, if you speak to salary only, you are demoralizing our employees. If you speak to total compensation, you help them understand that it is not as awful as some of the conversations have been in the past, but we still have ground to make up. That's the message I'm trying to say. We've spent too many years talking about salary in a vacuum, and our employees feel even worse about the amount of time and the workload they spend. When we look at total compensation, and please go to slide 13, because I don't want to be looking, I want to look at market average. Dr. Garza, I wanted to leave you this with my colleagues. I hope today, at least you understand from this school board member, I want to close that gap between year 5 and year 20. That's what I want to do. However, that is going to be looking at then closing the gap at 20 to 30. And that's a conversation that's going to require our employees' engagement, because we have more employees who fall in the latter years. And if we're going to try and figure out how to do something at one end, we can't be closing a gap in one area and looking at, but then we're still going to be higher in those later years and try to figure out how to finance it, unless Kathy Smith and Dan Stork can give us a windfall of money, and then we can leave the 22 to 30 alone. But I hope that what we're going to come out of this is the next time Dr. Garza and the leadership team come to us, it's with some plans in place. What are you going to recommend we do? And I know that's going to require engaging our employees, so they tell us, what do you want? Do you want to have what Ms. Reed talked about, which is the cafeteria plan? I don't plan on being a 30-year career teacher, so I want a menu option that says, I'm on your salary plan. And the other one who says, nope, I'm going for the career and I want the generous benefits. I don't know how we solve that one, but I just felt it was really important, Ms. Smith, to be clarifying that, what in the end is this board hoping for from this study? I think every single one of us has spoken to the fact that we are 100% behind Dr. Garza and our teacher associations who have asked us for years, stop talking about it and start doing something about it. And the supervisors are going to, I think, understand our commitment when we take action. And so that's what hopefully we'll have. I do hope, meeting managers, that when we go to next steps, we can all make sure that our data questions that we wanted to ask are clarified, because this one I felt we really have a lot of good data questions we're wanting to ask, and I'd like them captured.
So I guess one of the hardest things going forward, because we look at this scale in terms of what it is now and how many steps there are now, and comparing to what it would be. You know, I'm kind of visualizing when we get to the answer place, it will be a different piece that we look at. And that it is significant for employees to look at those gaps that they see where they've earned less money over time. And I appreciate the messaging's hard, but looking forward to new solutions to help us attract and retain people. So do we have next steps? Okay, so we can put them up there because we are running behind. Okay, and especially for our staff members to look at that and make sure they're clear, because it's mostly about getting data.
I had asked to see this survey. Oh, okay. Couldn't see it. Okay, thank you.
Pat?
Thank you. Just a clarification on the, I guess it's the fourth bullet or something. It says how many unfilled positions we have now compared to other surrounding jurisdictions. Is it possible to also get where the other jurisdictions started the year in terms of how many unfilled positions, or not?
No, I think with a lot of the information about other districts, we could ask the question. I think having those districts actually respond back to us may be something different. So we'll do what we can to ask those questions, and we could absolutely provide you with obviously FCPS data. But that means we have to go back out to all those districts and ask for that information.
Okay, great.
The data points.
Yeah, the more important one is how many unfilled positions we have now, right?
Yeah, certainly we can do that. We might not be able to get what the other jurisdictions, where they started and kind of where they are right now.
I think even with turnover rate, I'm not sure. If it's public information, I'm sure they'll share that information with us. It's just what information is available that they're willing to share with us. We could get you those data points. And we're also going to be providing a full report that will include some of the data points that you have been discussing today. But that report won't be available until we're done with all the market scale for the other positions.
I think the fifth bullet where it says data from applicant pools showing if they currently reside in or out of state, I captured that as more of a general question about how is our applicant pool changing. Yeah, thank you. So I would take off probably the specificity related to whether or not they were in or out of state. And I think that was my sense that you were getting at a broader question. Is that correct? Because it had to really do with, are they more qualified, less qualified, you know, et cetera. Mm-hmm.
I saw Megan.
Yeah, the bullet that says total compensation comparison, FCPS and market average to include dollar amounts, suggest bar chart. I'd like to simplify it. I wanted a market comparison chart for total compensation.
It's really the chart on page 10.
Right, we want it for page 13's data.
Right, reflecting full compensation.
We got it.
I understood.
I want to make sure it's there though, so because we leave work sessions and then it's like, which one was my question? So yeah. Oh yeah, market comparison chart for total compensation using format from page 10 and page 13 data.
Yep.
Okay. Are we good to go?
No, I'm not sure. I want to make sure, Ms. Smith, at one point we were getting some pension data numbers provided. It was, I guess, 15% is the average contribution to pension, and it can range from 10 to 16%. I mean, that was some, but it wasn't in our charts that I saw. I thought it was just being read to us. So So is that something that we
can add it in the follow-up, some of that data that was shared, like we're at, I think, I wrote it down, so I'll make sure that we get it added to the chart. I think we're losing.
Dan?
There is also going to be, and maybe you're just going to attach it to the final study, I don't know, but the kind of valuation of the retirement and the value, okay. So I don't know if you need that up there now, or you just, okay, all right.
Okay, thank you very much. And next will be Janie with the budget. We'll take a couple minute break. Thank you.